The wind carried dust across the empty plains, dragging with it the sound of boots against brittle earth. Eleanor Whitfield walked slowly, her frame bent under the weight of a small bundle tied across her back. The fabric held what little she owned now: scraps of cloth, a rusted tin cup, and pieces of bread that had already gone hard. By her side her daughters trailed, Mary, the eldest, pressing her lips together with a sternness unusual for her 12 years. Clara, curious-eyed even in misery, dragging her hand along the tall grass, and Abigail, no more than 6, stumbling but determined to keep up. Behind them, far in the distance, the town they once called home faded into nothing but a smear of rooftops and smoke. The sound of that place still echoed in Eleanor's mind: the whispers, the cruel stares, the pastor's booming words about God's will and women's failings. She had endured them for years, but the last confrontation had broken something in her. They had called her cursed not once but again and again: 3 daughters and no son. To them she was a waste, a burden to the community, a living reminder that she could not provide what men valued most. Her husband had died 2 winters back, crushed under the weight of a collapsing barn. She had tried to hold her place in town afterward, sewing for neighbors, trading butter and eggs, raising her girls alone. But every month, every season, the whispers grew. When Clara fell ill and Eleanor asked for medicine, the doctor's wife muttered loud enough for all to hear, "If only she had given him sons, perhaps she'd be worth the trouble." The cruelty did not stop there. It found its way into every corner, until finally Pastor Caldwell stood on the church steps one Sunday and told her, with the certainty of a man sure of his righteousness, that God had marked her, that she and her daughters would bring only ruin. That morning, with faces turned away and no hands offered in kindness, Eleanor gathered what she could and left. No man, no home, no kin to stand with her, only her daughters clinging to her skirts. The land stretched wide and merciless around them. Sagebrush dotted the dry ground. The sun beat down, and each step felt heavier than the last. Abigail asked in a trembling voice, "Mama, where do we go now?" Eleanor swallowed her own fear, forcing calm into her tone. "Forward, child." Always forward. Her heart pounded with dread, not only of the wilderness but of the unknown. She had grown up knowing the boundaries of farms, the safety of neighbors, even if those neighbors were cruel. Out here she had no fence lines, no walls, no familiar paths. Coyotes yipped in the distance. The wind carried a sharp chill despite the sun. Still, somewhere deep inside her, a spark remained. They might call her cursed, but she knew the truth. Her daughters were not a burden. They were the only treasure she possessed, and she would protect them against every storm, every man, and every mile of empty land if she had to. This is not merely the story of a mother cast out. It is the journey of resilience, of courage where none is offered, of love that refuses to bow to the cruelty of others. And as you follow Eleanor's path across the unforgiving plains of the Old West, you'll witness how one woman, branded unworthy, found strength greater than the men who scorned her. If you want to hear the rest of her story, make sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next chapter of Eleanor's fight for dignity and survival. Ahead, the plains stretched on, and the first signs of exhaustion began to bend Eleanor's steps. Her daughters leaned into her, their small voices breaking the silence with questions she could not answer. The sky was wide, the land harsh, but somewhere in that endless expanse a stranger was waiting, a man who had chosen the mountains over the company of men. And though Eleanor did not yet know it, their paths would cross soon, changing the fate of her family forever. The second night on the plains pressed down heavy, colder than Eleanor expected. She had tried to light a small fire with dry grass and twigs, but the wind killed every spark before it could catch. Her daughters huddled close, their thin dresses offering little against the chill. Abigail whimpered softly, her small hands trembling. Eleanor pulled the child into her lap, wrapping her own shawl around them both. Mary whispered, "Mama, we can't keep walking." Clara's feet are bleeding. Eleanor turned to her middle daughter, who sat on a rock clutching her toes. The soles of her shoes had worn thin. Eleanor's chest ached at the sight. She pressed her lips together, refusing to let despair claim her voice. We'll rest here tonight. Tomorrow we'll find water. We have to. Her words sounded stronger than she felt. The truth was bitter. She didn't know where they were headed. She only knew they couldn't go back. The wind carried a sound then, a slow, deliberate crunch of boots on gravel. Eleanor stiffened, pulling her daughters close. Mary clutched her mother's arm, whispering, "Someone's coming." Out of the dim light of the rising moon, a figure appeared. Broad-shouldered, tall, his beard tangled, his clothes worn but sturdy. He carried a rifle across his back, though he made no move to reach for it. The man stopped a few yards away, his shadow long against the pale earth. His voice came rough, gravelly, like someone unused to speaking often. "You're a long way from town, woman." Eleanor straightened, forcing steel into her tone despite the fear clawing at her chest. "We've no business with you. Move on." The man studied her, eyes narrowing beneath the brim of his hat. "A woman alone with 3 young uns, no fire, no horse. That's trouble waiting to find you." Eleanor's grip on Abigail tightened. "We'll manage." He stepped closer, slow enough not to startle. "Name's Boone, Silas Boone. I don't mean harm." His gaze moved over the girls, lingering on Clara's bare feet. "Looks like you're about done for the night. Where you headed?" Eleanor hesitated. To answer was to trust. Yet the weight of her daughters leaning against her made honesty slip free. "Nowhere in particular." "Just away." Silas nodded once, as if that answer carried more truth than any map could. He crouched down, pulling flint from his pocket. With practiced movements, he struck a spark onto a small bundle of dry moss he carried, coaxing it into flame. Eleanor watched warily, ready to shield her daughters, but relief slipped through her when the fire caught and warmth spread across their shivering bodies. Mary leaned closer, whispering to Eleanor, "He helped us." Eleanor's jaw clenched. "For now." Silas settled back on his heels. "There's a spring not far. Cabin, too. Safer than this open ground. You can come if you like. If not, I'll be gone by morning." Suspicion churned in Eleanor's stomach. A stranger offering help in the wild was as likely to be a threat as a blessing. Yet she saw no malice in his eyes, only the blunt weariness of a man accustomed to solitude. Clara spoke softly, surprising her mother. "Mama, please, I can't walk much farther." Eleanor looked at each of her girls. Their trust in her wavered, not because they doubted her love, but because their bodies were reaching their limits. She met Silas's gaze again, her voice sharp with warning. "If you mean us harm, you'll regret it." For the first time, the shadow of a smile tugged at his mouth. "I reckon you'd see to that." The fire crackled between them, fragile yet alive. Eleanor knew the choice before her, pride and suspicion on one side, survival and safety on the other. As the cold pressed harder, she understood there was no true choice at all. That night, under the thin shield of starlight and flame, a fragile alliance was born. But whether it was the start of salvation or deeper peril, Eleanor could not yet know. The dawn came thin and grey, the cold clinging stubbornly to the ground. Eleanor's body ached from the hard earth beneath her, but the sight of her daughters asleep in a circle near the dying fire steadied her heart. Silas Boone moved quietly nearby, tying up a bundle of gear with practiced hands. He did not speak much, but his movements spoke of a man who knew how to wrestle life from the wilderness. When the girls stirred, Eleanor rose and brushed dust from her dress. She kept her voice sharp, though fatigue weighed it down. "We'll move soon. The open land offers us no safety." Silas glanced over his shoulder, his face unreadable beneath the tangle of beard and shadow of his hat. "Cabin's a half-day walk north. Water, food, a roof. Safer than staying out here." Mary, still rubbing sleep from her eyes, asked, "Mama, can we go?" Her tone carried a mix of hope and desperation. Eleanor looked at Clara's cracked feet, at Abigail's hollow cheeks, and knew her girls could not endure another night in the open. She met Silas's gaze, her words edged with warning. "I'll follow, but I won't be beholden to you." He gave a single nod as if expecting no less. "Suit yourself." The journey north was harsh. The land rose into jagged slopes, where pine trees broke the monotony of sage and dust. Rocks shifted beneath their steps, and Eleanor had to steady Abigail more than once. Clara limped but refused to complain, her jaw set tight. Silas walked ahead, carrying most of their burden without being asked, his rifle slung across his back, his silence unbroken. By late afternoon, they reached a clearing tucked between tall ridges. There, hidden from the open plains, stood a small log cabin, weathered but sturdy. Smoke stains marked the chimney, and the door bore scratches of age and use. It was no grand house, but to Eleanor's weary eyes it looked like salvation carved from the earth. Inside, the air smelled of pine and old ashes. A rough-hewn table sat in the corner, and a stone fireplace lined one wall. Bundles of dried herbs hung from the rafters. Silas set down their meager belongings and spoke with the bluntness of a man unaccustomed to hospitality. "It ain't much, but it keeps the rain off." The girls explored cautiously, fingers trailing over rough wood, eyes wide with curiosity. Abigail whispered, "It's warm, Mama." Eleanor's throat tightened. She had expected suspicion, perhaps even fear, but instead her daughters looked relieved, as though the weight of the open sky had finally lifted. Still, unease gnawed at her. Safety was never free, and kindness rarely came without cost. That evening, Silas brought out strips of dried venison. He handed them to Eleanor, who eyed him carefully before dividing the meat among her daughters. Hunger overcame hesitation, and soon the cabin echoed with the quiet sounds of chewing. As the firelight flickered, Eleanor studied the man across from her. His face was rugged, marked by scars both shallow and deep. His eyes, though, carried no malice, only the stillness of someone who had long since chosen solitude over society. Mary broke the silence. "Why do you live out here all alone?" Silas scratched his beard, his voice low. "Men cause trouble. Out here I've got no need for 'em." Clara tilted her head. "And us? Do we cause trouble?" For the first time his expression softened. "Different kind of trouble, I reckon." Eleanor felt a stir of unease and something else she could not yet name. Gratitude, perhaps, laced with suspicion. This cabin offered shelter, yes, but it was also his world, not hers. She would not let her guard down so easily. As the girls drifted to sleep by the fire, Eleanor remained awake, her thoughts circling. Had she traded the cruelty of town for another form of captivity, or had she stumbled upon a refuge worth the risk? The mountains outside stood silent, as if holding the answer she could not yet see. The days inside the cabin settled into a rhythm, though it was one built on uneasy silence. Eleanor rose early, tending to her daughters, sweeping dust from the rough floor and trying to make the place feel like something more than borrowed shelter. Silas came and went, sometimes returning with game slung over his shoulder, sometimes with nothing but the weary look of a man who had walked too many miles alone. Eleanor watched him with suspicion at first, each movement measured, each word weighed for hidden motives. Yet she noticed how he never raised his voice at her children, never looked at them with the same judgment the townsfolk had carried in their eyes. He was rough, yes, but his presence lacked cruelty. That alone set him apart from the men she had known. One evening, while the girls sat on the floor whispering over a set of pine cones they pretended were dolls, Silas sat by the fire, his broad hands busy sharpening a knife. The sound of steel against stone filled the silence until Eleanor finally spoke. "You've been living out here long enough to grow roots. What drove you from town?" He paused, the knife held mid-air, then set it down slowly. "Men," he muttered. "And what men bring with them, greed, betrayal, a thirst for power." His gaze fixed on the flames, hard and distant. "I had a family once. Wife, little boy. Thought I'd carved out a life worth keeping. But men I trusted turned against me, took everything. By the time I raised my rifle, it was too late. I buried them both and walked away." Eleanor's breath caught. The bluntness of his confession struck her harder than a long tale ever could. "And you never went back?" Silas shook his head. "What was left to return to? I chose the mountains. They don't lie, don't scheme. They'll kill you if you're careless, but at least they do it honest." The fire crackled between them. Eleanor's heart ached in a way she hadn't expected. She thought of her own exile, how neighbors who once smiled had turned their backs when she needed them most. She thought of her husband's grave, marked by nothing but a wooden cross, forgotten by all but her daughters. "My husband died building a barn," she said quietly. "I buried him with my own hands. After that I did all I could to keep my girls fed, clothed, alive, but it was never enough. To them my worth was measured by sons I couldn't give." Her voice trembled, though she fought to keep it steady. "So they cast me out, said God's curse was on me." Silas lifted his eyes to her then, steady and sharp. Men love blaming women for the failings of their own pride. Don't mistake their cruelty for the Almighty's hand. The words struck her like a balm on a wound she had long carried in silence. Still, she wrapped her arms around herself, holding fast to caution. "You speak like a man who's lost faith." "I lost faith in men," he answered simply. Mary, listening quietly, looked up at her mother. "Mama, maybe he's right." "Maybe we ain't cursed." Eleanor's throat tightened, her eyes burning. She reached to smooth Mary's hair, her voice thick. "No, child, we are not cursed." For a long while the cabin held only the sound of the fire and the slow breaths of the children as they drifted to sleep. Eleanor sat with her hands folded, staring into the flames. Silas's words lingered, stirring something deep inside her, a sense of recognition, perhaps even kinship. And yet trust was not born in a single night. Old wounds still bled beneath her skin, just as his did beneath his. Whether those scars would bind them together or drive them apart remained uncertain. The first snow came earlier than Eleanor expected. It began as a fine dusting one grey morning, flakes drifting quietly against the cabin walls. Within a week, the world outside had turned white, the trails buried beneath drifts that reached higher than the girls' knees. The mountains that had once offered shelter now seemed like towering walls of ice sealing them in. Inside, the cabin grew colder with each passing night. The girls pressed close to the fire, their breath visible in the air. Silas split logs until his hands blistered, stacking them high by the hearth. Still, the pile shrank too quickly. The woods were full of danger when snow lay thick, wolves searching for prey, the risk of losing one's way in blinding storms. Yet without fuel, the cold would swallow them. Food proved the harder struggle. The snares Silas set came up empty more often than not. He returned once with a rabbit, another time with a pair of grouse, but days stretched thin in between. Eleanor learned quickly to stretch every bite, boiling bones into broth, scraping flour into a thin paste that resembled bread more than it tasted of it. Hunger gnawed at her stomach at night, but she gave her portion to her daughters, whispering that she was not hungry. Mary saw through the lie, though she said nothing. One evening, as the snow beat heavy against the cabin roof, Silas dropped a small sack onto the table. Inside were strips of dried venison. Eleanor looked up sharply. "Where did you find this?" "Hunted a stag higher up the ridge last winter," he said. "I keep caches hidden, always prepare for the lean months." Relief washed through her, though pride kept her tone steady. "You should have told me sooner." "Wouldn't have mattered," he replied. "Better to keep it quiet till it was needed." Mary, chewing slowly on her share, asked, "Mama, will we be all right?" Eleanor smoothed her daughter's hair, her voice low but firm. "We'll endure. That's what we do." But endurance came at a cost. Clara developed a cough deep and ragged that shook her thin frame. Eleanor spent long nights pressing warm cloths to her daughter's chest, praying silently, though her faith had been worn thin. Silas brewed a tea from pine needles and wild herbs, coaxing Clara to drink. "Not much," he said, "but it'll help her breathe." Watching him tend to her child, Eleanor felt a strange twist in her chest. Gratitude, yes, but also an unease she could not shake. She had lived so long fighting against men's control that accepting his help felt like surrender. And yet, without him, she doubted they would have survived even this far. The blizzard struck hardest in mid-January. Snow hammered the cabin without pause, winds howling like a chorus of ghosts. The fire barely held against the chill, and the roof groaned under the weight of ice. Eleanor and Silas took turns through the night, feeding the flames and steadying the beams with poles. The girls clung together beneath every blanket they owned. When dawn finally came, pale and cruel, the cabin still stood. Silas leaned against the wall, his breath ragged, his shoulders slumped with exhaustion. Eleanor looked at him then, truly looked, and saw not just a man scarred by solitude, but one bound by resilience, as determined as she was to keep the children alive. That morning, as the storm eased, Mary helped gather splinters for kindling, Clara coughed less than before, and Abigail laughed at the sight of icicles glistening like glass along the eaves. In their small survival, Eleanor felt something stir within her. Hope, fragile but real. Winter had tested them, nearly broken them. Yet in the heart of that trial, a bond was being forged, though its strength was not yet proven. By the time the snow began to thaw, Eleanor's thoughts turned again to the town she had left behind. The cabin, though sturdy, could not supply everything. Salt, flour, and tools still belonged to the world of trade. She dreaded the thought of returning, yet she knew survival demanded it. While Eleanor weighed her choices in the quiet of the cabin, tongues in town had already begun wagging. A peddler traveling through the valley had spotted a woman with 3 children near the ridges, guided by the reclusive mountain man. His tale grew with every retelling. Some said Eleanor had taken up with Boone in shame. Others whispered she had bewitched him to gain protection. The truth mattered little. What mattered was the scandal. Pastor Caldwell seized upon the gossip like a farmer on fresh seed. Standing before his congregation, he thundered of sin and corruption, of women who stepped outside God's appointed order. She turned from the Lord's path, he declared, and now seeks shelter in the arms of a godless hermit. This is what comes of pride and disobedience. His words sank deep into the minds of those already eager to believe. At the saloon, Jedediah Cross listened with a narrowed gaze. He had long resented Eleanor's husband, who once held land Cross had coveted. Now, with the man dead and Eleanor outcast, Cross saw opportunity. If Eleanor remained gone, her claim on that land would weaken, and if she dared to return, the rumors gave him every excuse to crush her standing. "She won't last out there," he muttered to his men. "But if she does, I'll see her brought back where she belongs, under heel." Back in the mountains, Eleanor sensed the shift without hearing the words. She noticed how Silas returned from hunting with a sharper edge to his movements, his eyes scanning the trails more carefully. When she asked, he grunted, "Tracks in the snow, men, not beasts, don't like it." Fear flickered in Eleanor's chest. "They're looking for us." "Could be," he said. "Could be just passing. Either way, best we stay alert." That evening, while the girls dozed, Eleanor and Silas sat close to the fire. The light carved shadows across his face, revealing the furrows of worry etched deep. She studied him, then asked quietly, "Why would anyone bother with us? We've nothing left to take." Silas's jaw tightened. "Sometimes folks don't need a reason. Sometimes envy's enough, or pride." His words struck true. She thought of Pastor Caldwell's eyes when he condemned her, of Cross's cold smirk when her husband's coffin was lowered into the earth. Yes, pride and envy were reason enough. Mary stirred in her sleep, whispering, "Mama." Eleanor leaned over to soothe her, brushing back her daughter's hair. When she looked back at Silas, her voice was firm. "If they come, they'll find me ready. I won't let anyone drag us back." Silas studied her for a long moment. At last, he nodded. "Didn't figure you would." Outside, the thawing snow dripped from the eaves, each drop a slow drumbeat in the silence. The mountains, vast and unyielding, offered both refuge and exposure. Eleanor knew their days of quiet were numbered. Word of her survival would spread like wildfire, carrying with it judgment and danger. And far below, in the valley where gossip turned to plans, men were already deciding her fate without her knowing. The mountain air was crisp that morning, carrying with it the scent of thawing pine and damp earth. Eleanor was mending Clara's dress by the hearth, while the girls played a quiet game of counting stones. Silas had gone out before sunrise, his boots leaving deep tracks in the soft ground. When he returned, his face carried a tightness she had come to recognize, trouble brewing on the wind. He set his rifle by the door and spoke low. "Riders, 3 of 'em, maybe 4. Saw smoke from their camp last night down by the creek. They ain't hunting deer." Eleanor's hands stilled on the fabric. Her heart quickened. How can you be sure? Men who hunt for food don't carry iron in plain sight, Silas said. These fellas rode heavy, like they came looking. Before Eleanor could answer, the sound of hooves broke through the quiet. The girls froze, eyes wide. Silas moved to the door, every motion calm, deliberate. "Stay inside," he said firmly. Moments later, voices rang out, rough and unwelcoming. "Boone," one man called. "We know you're holed up in there." Eleanor felt a chill run through her. She pulled her daughters close, whispering, "Quiet now, not a sound." Silas stepped outside, his shadow stretching across the clearing. Eleanor edged toward the window, careful to keep out of sight. She saw 3 men on horseback, their coats dusty, their eyes sharp with the hunger of those who lived off intimidation. The leader, a broad-shouldered man with a scar cutting across his cheek, leaned forward in his saddle. "We're not here for you, Boone. We're here for the woman and her brats. Town says they belong back where they came from." Silas's voice came low, steady as stone. "They don't belong to anyone." The man's smirk deepened. "Don't play righteous. You know what happens when folks go against order. That woman defied her place. The preacher wants her back, and Cross," his tone hardened. "Cross says she owes a debt." Inside the cabin, Eleanor's pulse hammered. She wanted to burst through the door, to shout that she owed no man, but she forced herself still. Her daughters clung to her skirts, trembling. Silas shifted his stance, the rifle loose in his hand. "You best ride on. Ain't nothing for you here." One of the riders spat into the dirt. "You planning to stand between her and the law of town?" "I don't give a damn about your law," Silas replied. "Only thing I care about is this mountain, and no man takes what it shelters without a fight." The standoff thickened, silence stretched taut as a bowstring. Eleanor could almost feel the tension pressing against the walls of the cabin. The scarred leader finally laughed, though the sound carried no mirth. "We'll leave for now. But Boone, you can't watch over her forever. When we come back, she'll answer for herself." With that, the men turned their horses and rode off, hooves pounding down the trail until the sound faded into the trees. Eleanor let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Silas stepped back inside, closing the door behind him. His eyes met hers, and for a long moment neither spoke. Finally, Eleanor's voice broke the silence. "They'll return." "Yes," Silas said. "They will?" Mary looked up at her mother, her small face pale. "What will we do, Mama?" Eleanor drew her daughters close, her resolve hardening like iron beneath the fear. "We'll stand," she said. "No one will drag us back. Not ever." Silas nodded as if he had expected no less. The firelight flickered between them, casting long shadows on the cabin walls. Outside, the mountain winds carried the promise of more trials to come. The cabin no longer felt like a borrowed shelter. It had become a forge where strength was hammered out of necessity. The threat of the riders lingered in every silence, yet instead of breaking Eleanor's resolve, it sharpened it. She knew now that survival would demand more than endurance. It required learning, adapting, and claiming a life not dependent on the mercy of others. Each morning began earlier. Eleanor rose before the sun, pulling on boots still damp from snowmelt, her breath a cloud in the cold air. Silas had shown her how to handle an axe, and though the first swings had blistered her hands, she kept at it until the wood split clean. The rhythm steadied her heart, every crack of pine a reminder that she was no longer helpless. Her daughters followed her lead. Mary carried herself with a maturity that startled Eleanor, gathering kindling without complaint, guiding her sisters when the tasks grew too heavy. Clara, despite her lingering cough, learned how to set small snares, her nimble fingers quick and clever. Abigail, too young for real work, still found ways to help, humming softly as she braided rope or fetched water from the creek. One afternoon, Silas handed Eleanor a rifle. She hesitated, the weight unfamiliar in her hands. "I've never—" she began. He cut her off gently. "You'll need to. Don't matter if you've never shot. Matters that you can when the time comes." Her jaw tightened. She lifted the rifle, awkward at first, but with his steady guidance she aimed at a pine trunk. The shot cracked across the valley, the recoil jarring her shoulder. She nearly dropped the weapon, but Silas's hand steadied it. "Not bad," he said. She met his gaze, her pride rising. "I'll do better." Practice became part of her days. Each missed shot frustrated her, but slowly her aim grew truer, her stance stronger. The rifle no longer felt like a foreign tool, but an extension of her will to protect her children. At night, when the girls slept, Eleanor sat by the fire, hands raw and muscles sore, yet her spirit lighter. For the first time since her exile, she felt control over her life returning, not given, not begged for, but earned. Still, doubt visited her in quiet moments. She remembered the jeers of the townsfolk, the way Pastor Caldwell's voice had condemned her as cursed. Those wounds did not vanish with hard work. Yet when she saw Mary teaching Clara how to tie snares, or Abigail laughing as she tried to balance kindling on her head, Eleanor felt a surge of certainty. They were not a curse, they were her strength. One evening, Silas returned with a brace of rabbits slung over his shoulder. He found Eleanor splitting logs, her arms straining but her strikes true. He watched for a moment before speaking. "You've come a long way from the woman who stumbled into my fire that night." Eleanor straightened, brushing sweat from her brow. "That woman had no choice but to beg help. I won't be her again." Silas nodded slowly. "Good. Dependence gets folk killed. But so does pride. Don't forget that balance." His words lingered, not as scolding but as truth. She knew he spoke from the scars of his own past. Later, as the firelight softened the cabin, Eleanor tucked her daughters into their blankets. Mary looked up sleepily and murmured, "Mama, you're stronger now." Eleanor's throat tightened. She kissed her daughter's forehead. "I have to be, my love. For you." Outside, the mountains stood tall and silent, guardians of a new resolve. Eleanor no longer saw herself as a woman cast out. She was a mother carving a life from the wilderness, determined to face whatever came next. The days lengthened with spring, the snow pulling back to reveal dark earth and stubborn shoots of green. Life in the cabin settled into something resembling rhythm. Chores were shared, food gathered, and evenings carried the low murmur of voices instead of silence. Eleanor found herself watching Silas more often, not with suspicion but with curiosity. He was a man of few words, yet his presence filled the space. He taught the girls how to track rabbits by the bend of grass, how to tell time by the slant of the sun. Clara, eager and bright, followed him with endless questions. "Why do the trees lean one way, Mr. Boone?" she asked once. Silas crouched to show her how the wind shaped them. "The mountain makes you bend or it breaks you," he said. Clara nodded solemnly, repeating the lesson later to her sisters as though it were scripture. Eleanor noticed how he carried himself with an unshakable steadiness, like the mountain itself. He never spoke of faith, yet there was a kind of quiet reverence in the way he treated the land and, unexpectedly, in the patience he showed her children. One evening, while Abigail braided wildflowers into Mary's hair, Eleanor sat sharpening a knife Silas had given her. He watched her from across the fire. "Never thought I'd see you handle steel like that," he said. She arched a brow. "You thought I'd always sit by waiting for someone else to provide." A rare smile tugged at his mouth. "No, just didn't figure you'd take to it so quick. You've got grit, Eleanor." The use of her name startled her. Few had spoken it with respect in a long time. She looked away, her hands tightening on the blade. "Grit comes from having no choice." "I never asked for this life." Silas's gaze lingered on her steady. "Maybe not, but you're living it better than most would." His words stirred something deep inside her, a recognition she hadn't expected. For years, she had been defined by what she lacked in others' eyes: a husband, a son, a place in the order of things. Now here was a man who saw her not as cursed or wanting, but as capable. That night, after the girls had fallen asleep, Eleanor sat by the fire, unable to quiet her thoughts. Silas joined her, carrying 2 mugs of pine tea. He handed one to her without a word. They sat in companionable silence until she finally asked, "Do you ever regret it, choosing this solitude?" Silas leaned back, his eyes fixed on the flames. "Regret's a useless thing. What's done is done. But I do wonder sometimes what might have been if things had turned different." Eleanor studied him, her voice softer now. "And now? Do you still want to be alone?" His eyes flicked to hers, the firelight glinting in their depths. "Don't reckon I am anymore." Her chest tightened, warmth and fear colliding. She had built walls high around her heart, yet cracks were forming, letting in something both dangerous and necessary. She sipped the tea, letting the bitterness steady her. Over the following days, their exchanges grew less guarded. Silas showed her how to mend traps, and she taught him how to stitch torn fabric with finer care than his rough hands allowed. When he joked clumsily about his lack of skill, she surprised herself by laughing. It had been so long since laughter had slipped free without weight behind it. Mary noticed the change first. "Mama," she whispered one morning, "Mr. Boone looks at you different." Eleanor hushed her, but the truth of it lingered. Something was growing between them, fragile, yet undeniable. And though she did not say it aloud, Eleanor knew the bond forming in that cabin was no longer just about survival. It was about belonging, about finding strength not only in herself, but in another. Whether she dared to trust it fully was a question still unanswered. Spring brought swollen rivers and the return of green to the valleys. With the thaw came a new problem. The cabin's stores had run thin. Salt, flour, even the last of the dried venison were nearly gone. Eleanor knew what it meant before Silas spoke it aloud. "We'll need supplies," he said one morning, tightening the strap on his rifle. "Can't stretch what's left." Her stomach knotted. The thought of stepping back into town, the place that had spat her out, made her skin crawl. "They won't welcome me," she said flatly. Silas shrugged. "Doesn't matter if they welcome you. Matters if they'll trade." Mary, listening nearby, whispered, "Mama, do we have to go?" Eleanor placed a hand on her daughter's shoulder. "Yes." "We can't live on pride." The journey down the mountain took a full day. The closer they drew to town, the heavier Eleanor's chest felt. She remembered every whispered insult, every averted gaze, every Sunday where Caldwell's words had branded her unfit. Her daughters sensed her unease, clinging close as the outlines of buildings came into view. The first faces they passed confirmed her fears. A woman at the well paused mid-pour, whispering to her neighbor. A group of men by the blacksmiths leaned in, smirks curling their lips. Eleanor kept her chin high, though heat burned her cheeks. Inside the general store, the room fell into a hush. The storekeeper, Mr. Harrow, cleared his throat awkwardly. "Well now, Mrs. Whitfield. Didn't expect to see you back." "I've come for flour, salt, lamp oil," Eleanor said, her voice steady though her hands trembled beneath her shawl. She set a pouch of coins on the counter. "I can pay." Harrow weighed the pouch, then gave a curt nod. Yet before he could fetch the goods, a familiar voice filled the doorway. "Imagine that," Pastor Caldwell said, stepping inside. His eyes swept over Eleanor, then flicked to the girls at her side. "The prodigal mother returns." A murmur rippled through the store. Eleanor felt her pulse quicken, but she met his gaze head-on. "I left because you cast me out. I won't bow now." Caldwell's mouth curved in a cold smile. "You live in sin, hiding with that mountain hermit. Do you think the Lord turns his face from such shame?" Eleanor's voice rose, carrying strength she hadn't known she still possessed. "If the Lord condemns me for keeping my children alive, then I stand condemned. But I will not beg forgiveness from men who never offered mercy." The crowd shifted uneasy. Some eyes glimmered with scorn, but others carried something different, hesitation, even respect. Before Caldwell could reply, another figure appeared, Jedediah Cross. He leaned against the doorframe, his hat tipped low. "You've got fire, Eleanor," he drawled, "but fire burns out quick. Land left untended don't stay yours long." Her spine stiffened. "That land is mine by right." "Not for long," Cross said. His smile was thin, sharp. "World don't have room for women who forget their place." Silas stepped forward then, his presence filling the room. His voice was calm, but it carried iron. "You'll find the world's bigger than you think, Cross, best you remember it." The store fell silent. For a long moment, no one moved. Finally, Harrow returned with the sack of flour and the oil, setting them firmly on the counter. "Coin's good," he said. "Trade's trade." Eleanor gathered the supplies, her daughters close at her sides. She did not look back as she walked through the crowd, though she felt their eyes on her. Some glared with hatred, but others looked at her with something dangerously close to admiration. When they left town behind, Eleanor exhaled, her chest lighter than it had been in years. For the first time she had spoken without shame. Yet the shadows of Cross's smile and Caldwell's threat followed her up the trail, reminders that the struggle was far from over. The climb back into the mountains was heavier than before. Though Eleanor carried the same sack of flour she had once shouldered with difficulty, the weight that pressed against her chest came not from grain, but from words. Cross's smirk lingered in her mind, a warning wrapped in certainty. Caldwell's thunderous voice echoed still, a brand she could not scrub away. When they reached the cabin, Silas set down the oil and salt with deliberate care. "Cross won't let this go," he said. "He's the kind to dig his claws in till something breaks." Eleanor steadied her hands against the table. "Then let him come. I will not run again." Silas studied her, his brow furrowed. "You think defiance alone will stop him? He's got men, coin, and the ear of the town." "I've lived under their judgment all my life," she answered. "What more can they take?" His eyes softened, though his tone held steel. "Your daughters, that's what they'll try for. And that's why I'm telling you, we may need to leave. Head further west. Find ground they won't follow to." The suggestion pierced her like a blade. She looked at Mary, Clara, and Abigail, busy stacking kindling near the hearth. Their laughter was fragile, as though carried on glass. "Leave?" she whispered. "After everything we've built here?" Silas stepped closer, his voice low. "Survival sometimes means moving on." Eleanor's heart rebelled. She had been driven once, cast out of town with nothing but scraps and shame. To flee again would be surrender, a confirmation of every cruel word spoken about her. She straightened, her eyes blazing. "No. This cabin, these mountains, they've given us life when no one else would. I will not give them up to men who think we're theirs to claim." Silas held her gaze, silence stretching between them. At last, he exhaled. "You've got fire enough to scorch this whole valley, but fire draws eyes. Cross won't come alone." That night Eleanor lay awake, listening to the slow breath of her daughters. She traced every crack in the ceiling with her eyes, her mind turning over choices until exhaustion stole her thoughts. Pride warred with fear, strength clashed with memory. She knew Silas was right. Danger gathered like storm clouds. Yet another voice inside her whispered that this was her moment to stand. The following morning she rose before dawn. She pulled Mary outside, handing her the rifle. "It's time you learned," she said. Mary hesitated, surprise flashing in her eyes. "Mama, are you sure?" Eleanor nodded. "The world doesn't care if you're ready. Better to be prepared." Silas watched from the porch, his expression unreadable as Mary aimed at a tree. The shot rang out, missing wide, but the sound itself was enough to make the girl's shoulders square. Eleanor's chest swelled with fierce pride. Later, Clara worked on tightening snares while Abigail carried water from the creek, singing to herself as though to keep the shadows at bay. Eleanor moved among them, teaching, guiding, reinforcing in each of them the truth she clung to. They were not weak, not cursed. They were hers, and they were capable. That evening, Silas sat by the fire, sharpening his knife with deliberate strokes. "You've made your choice," he said without looking up. "I have," Eleanor replied. He lifted his gaze, meeting hers across the flame. "Then we'll fight." The words settled between them like a vow. The air outside grew colder, the stars sharp against the dark. Somewhere in the valley below, men were gathering, shaping their plans, and in the heart of the mountain, a mother steeled herself for the storm she knew was coming. The first sign came with the crows. A restless flock circled low over the trees at the edge of the clearing, their cries sharp and unsettled. Silas noticed before anyone else. He stood on the porch, eyes narrowed, rifle cradled in his arms. "They're coming," he said quietly. Eleanor stiffened, her hands tightening around the axe she had been using to split kindling. The girls stopped their play, sensing the shift in the air. Fear crept into their eyes, but Eleanor forced calm into her voice. "Inside. Now." The girls obeyed. though Mary lingered long enough to ask, "Mama, will they hurt us?" Eleanor crouched, cupping her daughter's cheek. "Not if we stand together. Do you hear me?" Mary nodded, her jaw trembling but determined. By nightfall, torches flickered in the distance. Shapes moved between the trees, 5, maybe 6 men, shadows thrown long by firelight. At their head, Jedediah Cross's voice carried across the clearing. "Boone, Whitfield, you've had your time to play house in the hills, but this ends now." Eleanor's pulse thundered. She glanced at Silas, who crouched low by the window, rifle steady. His voice was calm, almost detached. "They'll try to scare us out first. Don't answer till you must." The men shouted insults, demands, promises of mercy if Eleanor surrendered herself and the children. The words stung, but they no longer bent her. She stayed quiet. Her daughters pressed close behind her, until the first stone struck the cabin wall with a hollow thud. Silas leaned close, his whisper hot against her ear. "We hold till they break. Cabin strong. They'll waste themselves trying." The siege began in earnest. Men circled the cabin, hurling rocks and curses. One torch landed near the roof, but Eleanor beat it out with a blanket before the fire caught. The air filled with smoke, shouts, and the crack of gunfire. Bullets thudded into the wood, splinters flying. Eleanor's heart pounded, but her fear had hardened into something sharper. She grabbed the rifle Silas had set aside and positioned herself at the back window. When one of the men tried to creep close, she fired. The shot went wide, but it sent him stumbling back, cursing. Abigail, huddled nearby, whispered, "Mama, you scared him." Eleanor pulled her daughter close for a heartbeat before steadying herself again. Silas fired with precision, his every shot deliberate, but even he could not be everywhere at once. "They'll keep at it till dawn," he muttered between rounds. Eleanor's mind raced. Supplies were limited, bullets fewer than she wished. Yet surrender was unthinkable. She looked at Mary, who stood pale but upright, clutching a small hatchet. Pride swelled in her chest. Hours crawled by. The shouts outside rose and fell, frustration seeping into the voices of the attackers. Inside, the cabin smelled of gunpowder and sweat, every breath thick with tension. Clara coughed quietly, and Eleanor hushed her, pressing a damp cloth to her lips. "We're all right," she whispered, though the words were as much for herself as for her child. Near midnight, Cross's voice rang out again. "You can't hide forever, Eleanor. Sooner or later the mountain will swallow you. Better to come out and save your brats the misery." Eleanor stood then, her voice sharp and clear through the door. "You'll not have me, Cross. Not now. Not ever. These mountains are freer than any town you command, and I'll fight to my last breath before I kneel to you." Silence followed, heavy and charged. For the first time, Eleanor felt the balance shift, not in their favor yet, but no longer against them entirely. The night was far from over, but something had changed. She was no longer only defending her life. She was defending her right to exist without shame. The hours dragged into the cold bite of early morning. The attackers had not left, though their shouts had grown hoarse, their tempers frayed. Eleanor felt every nerve in her body pulled taut, yet within the tension, a strange clarity settled over her. Fear had given way to resolve. She would not wait for these men to break her door. She would strike first. Silas reloaded his rifle with steady hands, his jaw tight. "They'll try again at first light. That's when they'll think we're weakest." Eleanor glanced at her daughters, their small faces pale in the firelight. "Then we won't wait for them," she said. Silas's brows lifted slightly. "You've got something in mind?" She nodded. "The snares Clara helped set near the ridge. If we drive them that way, the land will work for us." Clara's eyes widened. "Mama, you mean the traps?" Eleanor smiled, fierce and proud. "Yes, child. The very ones you learned to make." For a moment, Silas studied her as though seeing her anew. Then he gave a short nod. "All right. We'll give 'em reason to stumble." When the first grey light crept through the cracks, Eleanor readied herself. She handed Mary the rifle, guiding her hands carefully. "Only if you must," she whispered. Mary's lips pressed into a firm line, her small frame steady despite the tremor in her breath. Outside, the men regrouped, their torches casting long shadows. Cross's voice rose above the rest. "Last chance, Eleanor. Come out and we'll spare your girls a harder lesson." Her answer came sharp, cutting through the morning air. "Come and take me if you can." That was all it took. The men surged forward. Rocks slammed against the cabin walls, boots crunching across the clearing. Silas fired once, forcing them to scatter. Eleanor moved swiftly, flinging open the back door. "Now!" she hissed. The girls darted out with her, keeping low as they had been taught. Silas covered their retreat, shots cracking in the air. The attackers, thinking they had flushed their prey, followed hard on their heels. But the mountain was Eleanor's ally now. The men stumbled through undergrowth, chasing shadows. One of them stepped into Clara's snare, the rope snapping tight around his ankle. His shout split the dawn as he toppled hard, rifle clattering away. Another crashed through the brush only to be tripped by Abigail's crude pit trap, his curse echoing as he hit the earth. Panic spread through them. The mountain itself seemed to resist their advance. Eleanor shouted to her daughters, "Hold fast!" And they did. Mary aiming her rifle with steady hands, Clara tugging another rope trap taut, Abigail clutching her mother's skirts but refusing to cry. Cross's fury burned louder than the gunfire. "Boone, you think Trix will save you? You can't hide her forever." But Eleanor stepped forward then, her own rifle raised, her voice carrying across the clearing with a strength she had never known before. "I don't need to be hidden. I stand in the open and I will not bow to you." Her words cut sharper than any bullet. For a heartbeat, the attackers faltered. Silas seized the moment, firing a precise shot that shattered the gun from another man's hands. The echo rolled through the valley, final and unyielding. The remaining riders cursed, scrambling to drag their wounded companions away. The siege dissolved into retreat, their torches left smouldering in the dirt. Breathless, Eleanor lowered her rifle. Her daughters rushed to her, clinging tight. Silas approached, his eyes fixed on her with something more than respect, something close to awe. "You turned the tide," he said simply. Eleanor held her daughters close, her chest rising with fierce pride. "No," she replied. "We did." The mountain lay quiet again, but the silence now felt different. Earned, not given. The clearing was littered with broken branches, trampled earth, and the fading glow of abandoned torches. Smoke still hung in the air, mingling with the sharp scent of gunpowder. Eleanor stood in the middle of it all, her rifle heavy in her hands, her daughters pressed against her sides. Her body trembled from exhaustion, but her heart carried a steady beat of triumph. Silas walked the perimeter, eyes sharp, making certain the attackers had truly gone. When he returned, he laid a hand against the cabin wall, the wood scarred with bullet holes. "They won't be back tonight," he said. Eleanor swallowed hard. "But they will return." "Maybe," Silas replied, his tone measured, "but not so quick. You bloodied their pride." "That'll sting longer than any wound." Mary looked up at her mother, her young face solemn. "Mama, we beat them." Eleanor knelt, drawing all three girls close. "No, my loves, we endured them, and that's stronger than beating." Inside, the cabin bore the marks of battle. A chair splintered by a stray bullet, blankets used to smother sparks from a torch. Yet within the wreckage was proof of something greater. Their unity had held. As dawn spread pale gold across the mountains, Eleanor stepped outside, gazing at the horizon. The town lay far beyond, yet she could feel its weight. She imagined the whispers that would soon grow into shouts, how she had stood against Cross, how Boone had defied the preacher's judgment. Rumors, yes, but this time rumors that cut differently. 2 days later, a lone trader stopped by the cabin, his mule heavy with goods. He spoke in hushed tones of what he had heard in town. "Cross's men came back limping," he said, shaking his head. "Folks are saying Boone's cabin turned into a fortress. Some don't believe it, but others—" He leaned closer. "Others say maybe you're not cursed after all. Maybe you're something else entirely." Eleanor's chest tightened. To be called cursed had nearly broken her. To be seen as something else, a woman who fought, who stood, was a mantle she had never asked for, yet one she found she could bear. Later, as she and Silas repaired the cabin wall, she spoke softly. "Do you ever think about what people say of you? The names, the stories. Silas kept hammering, his face unreadable. Men talk. Let 'em. I know who I am. Eleanor studied him. I want that kind of certainty. He finally met her gaze, his voice low. You've already found it, Eleanor. You just don't see it yet. Her throat tightened, words failing her. She turned back to the work, each strike of the hammer echoing the truth she felt but could not yet speak. By week's end, the cabin stood stronger than before. Bullet holes patched, traps reset, supplies replenished with the trader's help. The girls returned to their lessons of woodcraft and chores, laughter creeping back into their voices. Life, though scarred, pressed forward. But Eleanor's nights were restless. She dreamed of Cross's eyes, dark with fury, of Caldwell's sermons dripping poison. They were not defeated, not yet, and still she no longer trembled at the thought. She had faced them once, and stood. She could do so again. On the final evening of that week, as the sun bled orange across the peaks, Eleanor sat outside with Silas. The mountains stretched endless before them, vast and unyielding. She breathed deep, the air sharp and clean. These ridges, she murmured, they've become my home. Silas's voice was steady, certain. Then you'll hold them. No man can take what you claim for yourself. Eleanor turned her eyes to the horizon, her daughter's laughter carrying from inside the cabin. For the first time since exile, she felt not just safe, but rooted. The fight was not over, but her heart no longer belonged to fear. The mountains wore spring like a crown, wildflowers scattered across the meadows, rivers swollen with meltwater, and skies painted wide with endless blue. The scars of winter and the battle with Cross's men lingered in the cabin walls, yet life within them had shifted. The girls moved with freedom, laughter rising easily now, and Eleanor carried herself taller, no longer bent beneath shame. One evening, as dusk settled like a soft blanket over the ridges, Eleanor and Silas sat by the doorway, watching Mary, Clara, and Abigail chase one another across the clearing. Their voices rose bright, unshadowed by fear. Silas leaned his elbows on his knees, his gaze steady. "They're strong, those girls," he said. "They had to be," Eleanor replied, her voice tender but proud. "But strength doesn't mean they should be unloved." Silas turned to her, his expression softened. "They've got you. That's love enough to carry 'em." Her throat tightened. For so long she had believed herself cursed, unworthy in the eyes of her neighbors, condemned to live as a failure. Yet here, in this wild refuge, she had proven every whisper wrong. She had endured not because of others' approval, but in defiance of it. Abigail tumbled into her lap, cheeks flushed. "Mama, look! I can run faster than Clara." Eleanor kissed her daughter's hair, holding her close. "You can run faster than the wind itself." The fire crackled behind them, warm against the cool night air. Eleanor glanced at Silas, the lines of solitude still etched across his face. She spoke softly. "When we came here, I thought we were only surviving. Now, it feels like living." He nodded slowly. "You've built more than I ever did alone. You've turned this place into something worth fighting for." Her gaze lingered on him, gratitude mingling with something deeper. "And you stood with us when no one else would." For a long moment, silence stretched between them, filled only by the laughter of children and the hum of evening insects. Then, Silas's voice, low but certain, broke the stillness. "You're safe now." The words landed with the weight of a vow. Eleanor felt them settle deep within her, not as a promise from him alone, but as a truth she had earned. Safety no longer meant hiding or begging for a place. It meant claiming her own, with her daughters beside her and the mountain as her witness. Later that night, after the girls had drifted into sleep, Eleanor stood outside beneath the stars. She let the cold air fill her lungs, her heart steady as the earth beneath her feet. She thought of the town, of Caldwell's sermons and Cross's smirk, of neighbors who had turned their backs. They no longer defined her. Their voices, once sharp as knives, had dulled to echoes. Mary's words came back to her from weeks before. "Mama, you're stronger now." She smiled faintly. Stronger, yes, but not hardened beyond love. The bond she and her daughters had built, and the quiet strength Silas had offered, had reshaped her into something neither cursed nor broken, but whole. When dawn came again, Eleanor woke to the sight of her daughters curled safely at her side. She brushed Clara's hair back, adjusted Abigail's blanket, and watched Mary stir awake with sleepy eyes. Each small motion was a reminder. Survival had given them more than life. It had given them freedom. She stepped outside with Silas, the mountains rising vast and unyielding before them. For the first time since exile, Eleanor felt not only unafraid, but certain of her place. To anyone listening now, remember Eleanor's story, how a woman cast out for what she lacked became greater for what she chose to be. If you've followed her journey this far, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the stories yet to come. And before you go, click on the video suggested on your screen. It's the perfect continuation of resilience, courage, and the unbreakable spirit of the frontier.